Welcome to the Speaking and Awakening podcast. My guest, he's a world-renowned medical doctor and researcher, and he actually was on one of our live shows, but it's gone back a long time. It was May 21 that you were on with your friend, Dr. Andy Kaufman. So you've been one of the leading voices speaking out against mainstream medical narrative and coordinated agenda of masking, social distancing, and I call it the poison dart because it actually works when we don't say the other word. His message of health, freedom, and personal autonomy has resonated with millions of people around the world. You've challenged conventional medicine to explore health and wellness in holistic terms, seeking to provide a collaborative forum for the exchange of knowledge, products, and practices that enable us to forge a new world together, governed by truth. Please welcome Dr. Tom Cowan.
Yeah, Cowan.
Cowan, sorry.
It's okay. Thanks, Roy. Good to be here.
Yes. So, I mean, I prior to recording, I was saying that I was actually trying to dig out one of your books that I was reading. And I suppose let's kind of go into, because what you were talking about is the children that when you were a doctor, and that what you noticed between those that were jabbed and that weren't jabbed. So maybe we start on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. The ones who got the routine injections were sick, and the ones who didn't generally weren't. And any fool who couldn't see that, I mean, that's the thing. We're trained as people and doctors to not see things. That's the interesting part about. In fact, I actually do have a new book coming out very soon, which I only wrote because somebody asked me to write it, because something called, it was going to be called How to Raise Healthy Children in a Toxic World, but I think they're going to change the title. And I mean, basically we're schooled, and schooled is the wrong word, I'd say indoctrinated, to not see what's in front of our eyes. And that's a problem, because if you don't see and you're not able to think about what's going on in the world, you become fodder for manipulation. And that's sort of what happened. Interestingly, not to go on and on here, but this was actually codified in science. Like, this is not a error in science. This is actually built into the fiber of how we do science in the last 100 years. Let me give you an example. Everybody knows Albert Einstein, right? You've heard of the guy, I'm sure. Supposedly the smartest guy in the world, like the history, right?
And he had a twin. I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no. Time Magazine's Man of the Century. So here's a paraphrase from what he said. He said, science should no longer be based on observation and experimentation, but should be based on free inventions of the mind, which you could translate to say making shit up, right? So no, you're no longer supposed to say, well, this is a pen, and if I do like this with the pen, it writes on the paper. And how do I know that? Because I observe it, and I could do experiments. And so if I take the cartridge out of the pen, then it doesn't actually write anything, right? And then I learned that it's the cartridge that writes. But he said, no, you're not supposed to do it like that anymore. You're just supposed to make stuff up. And so they did. They make up viruses, and they make up nuclear weapons, and they make up all kinds of stuff. And nobody knows, well, did you do an experiment, or did you see the virus, or did you do an experiment that proves it's there? No. Why not? Because we already know that the smartest guy, he said, you don't do it like that anymore. Because, you just make stuff up. And I would contend, this may be controversial, but everything that individual human beings make up is wrong. Because we don't know everything. And so you make up stuff, here's the way this works, not based on, observation or experimentation, but just making stuff up, it's wrong.
Based on our belief system that has been indoctrinated into us.
Yeah. And it may take a while to figure out why it's wrong or how it's wrong, but eventually it will be shown to be wrong. What's interesting then is once that happens, right? Like once you show that it's wrong, then you have two options. One, you can make up something else to keep the story going, or you could say, yeah, that original thing was wrong. Like, here's an example of that. So they originally said there's got these viruses, you can't see them, but everybody who contacts somebody who has the virus gets sick. Everybody. Because that's the way viruses are. So they say, well, measles, that's a viral illness. And so you put, 100 people or 10 people contact somebody with measles, and not everybody gets sick, right? It's obvious. Some do, some don't. Some get something different. It's all over the map. So that statement was falsified, right? You get around somebody who's sick, you get sick same way. That's not true. So now you could say, well, maybe that whole thing doesn't work like we thought. Or what happened was they said, well, that's because some people are immune to the virus. Like, wait a minute. Like so you didn't see anything. You didn't do an experiment. You don't know what like you just made up an explanation to cover the falsified first theory. Then you say you falsify that because you don't know what an immune system actually is, or it's antibodies. And then you say, well, it turns out some people have antibodies and some people don't. So it's not actually what keeps you from being sick. And then they say, like with measles, if you have antibodies, then you don't get sick. But if you have HIV and you have antibodies, then the virus is going to kill you. And you think, wait a minute. That's like messed up, right? That's like...
And I think it was the Navy, I don't know, was this 100 years ago, but they tried to do tests on passing the flu on. And they were even coughing into people's faces, injecting them, and they couldn't give them the flu.
You couldn't give them the flu. Yeah, it was the Army, the Rossino experiments in 1918. 100 and some people, they bribed prisoners so that, they would cough on them and everything. And they even sucked snot out of their nose and injected it up their nose. Not one got sick. And you know what the amazing thing about that study was? So they proved that this phenomena wasn't contagious, right? Proved it twice. Other people did similar things. So in the conclusion, do they say, yeah, well, it turns out the flu isn't contagious, so it can't be a virus or anything? No, they said, we didn't try hard enough to make these people sick. And you read that and you think, what were they going to do? Like do a lung transplant? And then, oh, we did a lung transplant and the guy got sick. Right. So that means that's because the flu is contagious. I can tell you in 37 years of doing medicine, not one person came to me and said, Doc, I was doing fine, and then somebody came and stuck snot up my nose from this sick guy over there, and I haven't been the same since. Not once. Or, yeah, I had a lung transplant, and ever since then, I got this cough. You think, what is wrong with these people?
So,
Anyway,
because like I remember, like just researching and delving deeper when you came on the show and reading your books and stuff like that, and I found it fascinating. And like I think a load of the stuff that I've kind of researched, I mean, thankfully I kind of realized at the start of this whole lockdown thing, I was like, this doesn't look right. Then I saw the PCR tests were being bought. I don't know, was it in the billions or the millions? I was like, okay, in 17 and 18. But when I started reading lots of books, What Really Makes You Ill, The Poisoned Needle, I think was another one that was in the 1950s. And it was kind of in line with what you're saying yourself. Like a load of the stuff causes eczema, causes all these different things that people are suffering from, which we think is kind of normal. But it all comes from this poisoned dart. And like, I mean, I have that little jab in my arm. I don't know, did you get that one, Mike? But basically,
yeah, I didn't get that one.
like when I started hearing about the polio and how that kind of organized, and then you go back to like the cowpox, and it was apparently cow and horse pox, but don't call it horse because people like horses, and Edward Jenner, I don't know, apparently on his deathbed said it was a joke and that it doesn't work. I mean, it's very hard to know what's true and not, but from me not being a doctor and just what I've researched and just seen, I wish I had never ever touched one in my life, and nobody should ever, because from what I can determine, not one works. And I mean, I've had a lot of people on the show and they'd be like, they'd be trying to push something, say, oh, but this does. And in the end, when you give them information from it, I mean, I don't have the same background as you, and obviously you can give, you know where to resource stuff. I don't. But the fact that I can see this, what's wrong with the industry? Have people been so brainwashed that they go along with the agenda that their education system, or is it that their pockets are so lined they don't want to be emptying their pockets?
Well, there's three reasons why you're right. There is not a single, as you say, poison dart, that's a good word, that A, prevented anybody from getting sick, and B, didn't poison them in the process. Now, it seems to be that some of the COVID poison darts were placebos, which was very clever, like to put saline in it, because then you say, well, I know 10 people, nothing happened to them. Right, because they didn't put anything in there, which so that people would say that, right? There is no rationale, since we know viruses don't exist, or the technical way to say it is, nobody has ever shown that there is such a thing called a virus. There's no evidence. Bacteria do not cause disease. That has been disproven, and even parasites. So there's no rationale for giving somebody an injection. And so it can't possibly do you any good. And so nobody should get them. Now, I personally, I don't know about you, but I'm not for, quote, outlawing stuff like that. That would mean that I would want the government to decide that they've decided these are bad. And frankly, I don't want a government, because that's make-believe too. So I don't mind if people decide to do it, right? They can make it, and you can do it if you want. But the reality is, if you look into it at all, it makes no sense. And let me give you an example, another one, a recent one, which, for me, it's the inability of people to hear something and say, wait a minute, that just doesn't make any sense. So here you have the situation, in Israel, Palestine, Gaza, right? So these, you could go back and make a whole big thing, but it's clear that the health and well-being of the children in Gaza is not the primary concern. I think most people would agree with that. So here they find a bit of DNA, which they claim is from a polio virus, and because they have one person who they claim has polio, which they can't even define what the disease is. They've never found the virus. And suddenly they're going to stop all the bombing and everything so that they can get 1.5 million doses of the polio vaccine into the poor Gaza children who otherwise might get polio. Now, I can tell you, if you read that or hear that story and you think, yeah, that sounds right, there's something really wrong with you.
Yeah, that's the serious mass genocide with that one.
Yeah, and to think that somehow they care so much about these children who the day before they, blew up a bomb, right? But now the only concern they have is so they don't get polio. Like, that is weird, right? And so when you see that, you realize that, these injections have anti-fertility components to them. And then you start realizing there's a whole nother reason why they're doing this. And it's not because they care so much about the poor, starving children in Gaza. And there's so many examples like that. Like, if the government was really interested in the health and well-being of the people, there's a lot of things they would do besides like closing their business and starving them and poisoning them and all the rest of it. That's not what a normal, rational person would do if their agenda was to care for people, right? That's not what they would do, but that's what they did. So at some point, people have to say, this doesn't smell right. Like, I'm not buying this. But for some people, it takes a lot, I guess.
And I mean, the strange thing is, when all these poison darts were being given out, it was Israel were getting the most doses. They were really... Yeah. So, it's not as if they're loyal to one side. It's like cannon fodder everywhere. And
right. Like, so they care so much about the people. They were willing to make a secret deal with Pfizer to corner their market and make sure everybody in their country was injected. That's how much they care about the people, that, these sort of backroom deals and collusion and fudging the data, right? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Curious one for you, because we've seen massive gender confusion and all the transgender. Do you think, is it possible? I mean, I know the programming that they've done around the world, but my own thoughts is it's quite possible. Is it possible that the poison dart is actually causing a lot of that as well?
I mean, I don't have any direct evidence for that. I think there's a lot of things that people are doing which, let's just say, don't promote normal physical development. They don't eat normal food. They don't live in normal ways. They don't have contact with the sun and the earth and people, and they're bullied and indoctrinated and poisoned, and all that's going to result in sick and confused people. So I don't think, just like there's no magic bullet of curing people, there's probably no magic bullet of sickening people either. Like, it's a lot of those things. But certainly giving people injections that can do them no good and poison them without any doubt fosters every kind of disease and sickness you can imagine, including that one.
I know, like, you're doing, I believe it's when I saw you have a farm, do you? Do you have animals and stuff like that? Are you doing?
Yeah, I don't have a farm. That would be delusions of grandeur, and I don't. Besides, I don't want a farm. But we have a homestead with about an acre garden. We have 4 goats, 4 cats, and 3 now chickens.
That's a farm to me.
3 of the chickens died. Well, 2 died. 1 got eaten by a hawk, I think. And we're waiting till they died until we get new chickens. So yes, we deal with animals a lot and grow a lot of our own food. That's mostly what I do these days.
Because, like, I mean, if we look at the illnesses that are coming, obviously one we've discussed, but one, processed food, all the gunk that we're getting, because it's very few people can get it from, the farmer. And is it the toxins coming out that's causing all these kind of allergies and different things? Because we're bombarded, with the sprays that they're giving us. And it even goes deeper, because the more you kind of say earlier, that the more we're learning, the more we realize, well, for me, I think the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. I'm just constant, like aftershave, I didn't realize that was toxic. And since I knew that, the deodorants and stuff like that, that's blocking the pores, especially for the women. Like, we're being bombarded from about 50 directions intentionally. And it's a $1 million question. Like, I think health is probably, the food is probably the one thing that's probably our saving grace, good quality water and the food that we do. Because, like, it's impossible to get away from the sprays and stuff.
But here's the most important thing for people to realize. And it took, I was trained and indoctrinated just like everybody else. In fact, more than most people, because, I'm a trained medical doctor, as they say. Here's the biggest psyop of all in the health realm. We are told that there are these distinct diseases, which mean that your body is sick or mistaken or malfunctioning or, doing something wrong, right? And so then we've spent the last hundreds of years categorizing. So if you're paralyzed, then it's polio. And if you got snot and Koplik spots, then it's an illness called measles. And if you have chest pain and then your part of your heart dies, that's called a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. So you got all these things that malfunction in your body, and they're categorized into different diseases. That's the medical model. And so what a doctor does is try to match the signs and symptoms. So what you say and whatever test, and then categorize it. You have Guillain-Barré, you have lupus, you have a heart attack, you have ovarian cancer, you have depression, you have whatever, right? That's the medical model. The reality is, every symptom you have, and I mean everyone, everything your body does is directed towards healing. It's not a disease. It's directed towards healing. And that's because you've been either starved, poisoned, or diluted or traumatized sometime before. And this is the best way your body can deal with it. So let me give you an example, because that may be too abstract. It's very simple to see. Let's say you get a splinter in your finger, right? And then you don't take it out. What happens next? You get pus, right? You go to a doctor, he says you got an infection in your finger, right? And gives you antibiotics to get rid of the infection. The reality is, anybody can see, is the pus is the therapy for the splinter, right? It gets the splinter out. How do I know that? Because if you don't do anything, pops the splinter out, splinter goes away, heals up, and you don't even know what happened, right? Everybody has had that experience. So it's easy to see that disease called infection is actually the therapy for the splinter. The splinter is the toxin. So let's do a harder one. So you breathe in all this crap that you just mentioned into your lungs. So that's like splinters. a lot of them. So you get a cough and mucus, and you feel bad, and it's green and yellow, and you try to cough up that stuff out of your lungs, right? That's what happens. You go to the doctor, he says you have bronchitis. He gives you an antibiotic to stop the cough, and so the stuff stays in your lungs. That bronchitis is not an illness. It's your body's way of getting out the debris that you breathe in. It's very simple and obvious, right? So let's take even a harder one. And let me ask you a question. You got a house, right? You got a foyer of your house, entrance of your house. Somebody puts a whole load of stinky garbage, drops it in the entrance of your house. What do you do next?
Get a baseball bat and slap him into the head.
Right. After you do that, okay, so you did that.
Yeah, you basically clean it up and put it where the refuse is collected.
Okay, how about that? We're going to get very specific here. You put it in a bag.
Yeah.
Or a can, right? And then you put it like in the garage. And then when the dump thing comes, you take it out to the curb and they take it to the dump. Or you take it to the dump. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody puts a whole lot of garbage in your house called your body, and you can't, and you tried to cough it out, but the guy stopped you from coughing it out. You tried to spew it out through your skin, but then they gave you a cream to keep it from coming out. So now you're accumulating garbage in your house. So what do? You put it in a bag, right? Same as you would. That's called a tumor. And then you put it in a place that maybe you can live without, like a breast. And so that's good. So then, but the net guy, you didn't hit him hard enough with the baseball bat. So he keeps coming back and throwing more garbage, right? Because you didn't learn anything. And so then you have to put it in the liver. And then you have to put it in the spare bedroom. And then you have to put it in the kitchen. And then you put it in the master bedroom. And then you can't live in your house anymore. So you move to a new house. That's exactly what happens. You get garbage. They keep it from coming out. They put more garbage in you called chemo. And then they sometimes take the garage out. They cut it off your house. They cut off your spare bedroom. That's called surgery. And then you keep accumulating garbage until you can't live in your house. And then you move. And that's called dying. And that's because the point is that making tumors was your body's therapy. It's not a disease. It's what would you do if somebody poisoned you? You got to put it somewhere, and they stopped you from getting it out. Now, the reason I ended up thinking this is if you ask an oncologist, like that's a cancer doctor, how does the tumor that go from the breast to the liver, right? Because they say it's the cells, are growing and they go through the bloodstream, swim to the liver and set up a new place in the liver. So I asked him, can you show me the tumor cells in the blood? Right? Because it went through the blood. No. Why not? Well, it's not enough of them to see in the blood. So how do you know it went through the blood if you can't see it? Well, how else did it get to the liver? Right? How else did it get to the spare bedroom? It must have crawled from the foyer to your spare bedroom. But if you say, well, I looked in the hallway, I didn't see any crawling garbage. No, that's it. It was. So that made me think it's not crawling. It's not cells growing. It's the accumulation of garbage cans. And that explains everything. Explains why chemo and all doesn't work, and why if you do sweat baths and saunas and all that, it sometimes does work. Because if you can get rid of the garbage, then you don't have to move. And so it's very simple, these things, but somehow we're so schooled and indoctrinated that we can't see it. And we have this system of medicine by these allegedly brilliant people that makes no sense.
I'm just curious, actually, because I mean, I have an infrared sauna, and I go to the other sauna at the gym, and I mean, you're obviously getting rid of all the toxins, but like in Finland and Sweden, I mean, that's the norm. Most of them have them in their houses, so I assume like that there's very low cancer rates in them countries.
Probably less, right? Because if people are dedicated to not putting so much stuff in, but as you point out, in some of that you don't have perfect control of them anymore, right? Because there are, these sort of monopolies where they do things to you which you didn't agree to, right? They spray stuff in the air and you can't get different air to breathe, right? Because it just doesn't work like that. So therefore, people have said, well, I'm going to try to control the stuff I put in, but I can't always, so I'm going to help my body get it out. That's what a sauna is. That's what a sweat lodge is. Every sustained, viable culture did stuff like that. And we don't, which is why we're not going to make it. If we don't change how we think of these things, and based on actual observation and experimentation, not making stuff up. So we make stuff up. Oncogenes, it's the genes that do it. You don't have any, it's not the stuff they put in your body, it's not the jab, it's not the food you're eating, it's not that you don't get along with anybody, it's not that you never been out in the sun or connected to it's your genes. That's what got you cancer. And then when you go looking for the proof, there isn't any. In fact, the proof is that it doesn't work like that.
I wish, like, the cancer, because I mean, I can't understand why anyone gets chemo. It's like the only people I've seen survive kind of younger kids, because obviously they're probably stronger, stuff like that, but it's very small percentage of adults, and then they just get sick and get more operations all the time and everything. And if we look at like the Rife machine, Royal Raymond Rife frequency devices and stuff like that, I mean, they've been proven to kind of, remove a cancer through frequencies, but yet that's squashed. And even a strange thing, because you can get the Spooky 2, which is a device, and then I've got a few of my friends have it, and I had it on my laptop, and the program kept disappearing, and I'm not really high up in IT, and I got an IT specialist to kind of have a look at it, and he goes, no, it's Microsoft is removing it from your computer. So, yeah, exactly. So, like, well, it kind of shocks me that
these are the people, by the way, who you trust to take care of your health, who have your best interest at heart. That's why they did these mandates, because they were so concerned about your well-being and your overall economic health well-being, that they're also willing to remove stuff from your computer that you decided might be helpful for you. You're not like hurting anybody or trying to convince people of anything. You're just saying, yeah, I looked at this and I thought I'd give it a try. And that you're not allowed to do, right? And those are the people who you think have the ability and the right to decide what's good for you. Like, that's weird. That's like, to come to those two conclusions at the same time, it's weird. Like, if you think that something happened to you, that's weird to get you to believe stuff like that.
Exactly. There's a few people, like a lot of things, people would get the runny nose or they get the sore throat and everything. And what I've kind of learned myself, just through trial and error, was Albus-oil on a handkerchief and just breathing it. And I've told a few people about that, and that stops the
What is it on the handkerchief?
Albus-oil.
Yeah.
And that works straight away. And the other one, it was my father told me this one, was when you feel a sore throat, because it goes from the throat to the nose and then into the lungs or whatever. Whether that's the way that really happens, I don't know. But basically, cider vinegar and gargle that for 30 seconds, and that stops it. So, like, there's little things you can do. But I'm just curious because we talked about how they were trying to infect people and they couldn't do it. But I know from my kids, when they go to kindergarten or early school, if there's one ill, they nearly all get ill. And how is that happening?
So here, people say that it's like the last refuge of fools. Not to call you a fool, but that's
been called worse.
That's like the last stand. I'm planting my flag. My child went to a party and they got chicken pox and somebody else, and that's my last stand. So what I say to that is the following. So let's just think rationally here. What did you actually see? Because you didn't see a virus, right?
No. I mean, like, honestly, it's like you go in and you see one child. That's just, they're run down. They're obviously, they're ill. And then within 3 days, because the parents obviously are both working, they can't afford to leave the child at home, and which I understand, just through the way that's all orchestrated as well. And then maybe 10 get ill.
Right. But let's just go through this very rash and to see what it is that we saw and what we didn't see. So we didn't see a virus, right? Nobody saw a virus. We didn't see transmission of anything, right? You didn't see something go from the first person, the sick person, to the well person, right? You didn't see that. You think that might have happened, and that's fine to think it, but you didn't observe it, right? So what did you observe? You observed that a sick person a well person was in the vicinity of a sick person, and they got similar symptoms. That's what you saw. Agree?
Yeah.
So let's make a principle out of that. That the principle is, if two or more sick are people, let's start again. If two or more people or animals, right, works the same with animals, have the same symptoms or similar, same place, same time, that means something was transmitted from one to the next. Right? That's
the assumption that I'm making.
Yeah, that's right. But that's the principle that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do a thought experiment here. You put 100 rats in the basement and somebody puts rat poison. Next day, 10 rats all bleed to death, right? And then the next day, 20, and then the next day, the rest of the 70. And then after 3 days, all the rats have the same symptoms, bleeding, the same time, same place, right? If that principle was true, then you would have to say something was transmitted between the rats. But that's not true, because they all ate rat poison. So nothing was transmitted. That is not a contagious event. That's a poison, right? So in other words, that principle you cannot say from that observation. Same people, two or more people get sick, same time, same place, same symptoms. You cannot therefore conclude that was a transmissible event. Because sometimes it may be, but sometimes it clearly isn't. Therefore, when you get to that kind of an impasse, you have to do an experiment. In other words, you take 10 people who have chickenpox, or you say a rundown, and you put 10 well people in the same room, and then you do put the same or different well people in the room with people who don't have chickenpox, same environment, same house, same people yelling at them, the same everything, except the one has the sick people and the other doesn't, and see if they transmit the illness. That has been done at least 200 times that I know of. For those who are interested, there's a book called Can You Catch a Cold by Daniel Roides, who's documented 200 experiments with the cold and flu, all of which failed to show transmission of illness. 100%. Therefore, any rational person looking at the evidence would have to conclude that's not how it works. Period. So what happened when your child went to a chickenpox party? I mean, first of all, we may not know what happened. But what we do know is that that they didn't get transmitted a virus or even an illness. Because every time we've looked at that, we show that it doesn't work like that. Now, could it be that there's some sort of phenomenon, like the wallpapers? They were able to show that if you put wallpaper with arsenic in it, which they used to put wallpaper was impregnated with arsenic, when you go to the person's house, the arsenic outgasses and the children get rashes. So that could be an explanation. It could be that it was an emotional, event, or there could be a million different explanations for it. The only one we know is not true is it's a virus, it's a contagious event, because that one has been disproven. The others nobody looked at to see if that's actually what could have happened, because we're so enamored with the first two that even if it's been disproven, that we don't bother to look into it.
Mm. And I mean, because we talked about the military one and stuff like that, so I'm conscious of that. And it's like, so my thoughts are, is it possible that because the person is trying to heal because of and there's a frequency, and that frequency is being transferred into the other people?
Could be.
Because the same with the child going home, he has the cold, then the whole family gets the cold. That's what I could think of, because how is it that they try it and they can't get an infection? So I'm thinking, is it the frequency that's actually...
Could be the frequency. But I tell you something that's very interesting that many of us in this kind of thinking have seen. As soon as you really convince yourself, not by delusional thinking, but by looking at the science, looking at experimentation and observation, that illness is not transmitted, for some reason you stop getting sick around people who are sick. So that, you could say, well, this is all well and good. It's all sort of, abstract stuff. The reality is, I don't know how many people that there's some interesting examples who insist, COVID is a virus and it's transmitted, and what's their evidence? Well, they've got it 6 times in the last 2 years. Every time they're around somebody with, quote, COVID, they get sick. And so that convinces them that there must be a virus and it's transmitted. And at some point I've asked them, man, you seem to get sick a lot from this. Everybody I know who doesn't think there's a virus, they've never had COVID. Do you ever wonder, maybe
honestly,
you're doing
the
something wrong?
friends that I have that have just got every jab and they believe everything, they're constantly sick.
Constantly,
and the friends that I've got that will never touch it and everything, I don't see them sick at all.
Yeah, they've got their 4th booster, and this is their 6th bout of COVID. But thank God they're still alive, because if they didn't get the boosters, they'd be dead.
Which, of course, this is kind of the power of the mind, because one of the things in Ireland people you'd say was, don't go out in the rain, you'll get a cold if you get your hair wet. And like, then I just kind of ruled that out. I said, I'm not buying that. And that never happened again. So you're being conditioned to think a certain way, which in turn is causing the effect that you're experiencing. And then which in turn the next person in the room. So if you've got a cold from having wet hair, and then the other people in the room have a belief system, oh, if you're around somebody that has a cold, I'm going to get a cold. And you will, because you've just told yourself that. You've been conditioned to think that way.
Yes. In fact, Daniel's books, he does show, because I misspoke a little bit, there are some studies that have shown transmission of like cold-like symptoms. And in those studies, they deliberately told people, we're going to expose you to this and it's going to give you a cold. And sometimes they just gave them saline or just plain water and they squirted it up their nose. Next thing you know, the person has a full-blown cold. And then they say, oh, by the way, we just found out you were in the placebo group and you didn't get anybody's, cold snot. You just got saline. And then the next day they're better. So, right.
And I don't know, do you remember, I read there was one with people with knee problems and they were getting the operation. And they basically drilled the holes, didn't do the knee operation, and they got the same effect.
Yeah, well, they did that with stents with so-called coronary artery disease. Famous study, Lancet, October 2017. They took people with, chest pain, angina, and they said, 95% blockage, and half of them they put a stent in, the other half they stuck the catheter in, but didn't put a stent in. They told them they did, but they didn't do anything. And they had the same result. So, yeah.
You mentioned the science. So there's real science and then there's paid science. And unfortunately, the ones that we see on the television and the governments are ramming down our throat is the paid science and not correct science. So how do people actually know what is real?
Yeah, that's a hard question. You have to spend your life investigating that. But here's the biggest help that I've gotten in my life for that. I tell you, if anything I want people to remember, the thing that helped me the most was I made the conscious, clear decision to not worry about what is true and only say investigate whether something is or isn't true. Because as soon as you start saying, well, I'm going to think it's a virus unless I can come up with a different explanation for chickenpox, you're lost. Because then you're going to get into dueling theories. The reality is, in the way that science is meant to work, is people make claims or hypotheses, and then you try to falsify it. If you can't falsify something, it's not science. It's a belief system. Now, I have nothing against believing stuff, but you have to be clear that this is a belief and you can't prove it, and you just came to that belief. That's fine, but you don't try to force other people to believe stuff, right? Because that's weird. With science, if you want to know something, then you find the claim and you see if it's real or not. Let me give your listeners an example. And the one I stole this from somebody, but guy's 18 years old. He's Asian looking. His parents are Caucasian. He always wondered how that came about. He one day rummages in his parents' closet. He finds adoption papers. He didn't know he was adopted. Goes to his mother and says, hey, I found these papers. You got me in an orphanage in China. That explains why I look different. Is this true? Yes, we didn't want to tell you because, we didn't want to disturb you, etc. you were adopted and we're waiting, we're going to tell you. So it's clear, right? So you go to your best friend, you say, man, I just found out I was adopted, and I'm a little shook up, and he says, so who are your real parents? Yeah, I don't know. Just found out I was adopted. So I was in an orphanage in China. Well, I don't believe you were adopted until you can tell me who your real parents are. Like, that's weird, right? It has nothing to do with each other. The one is a claim, I was adopted. You verify that or falsify it. That's how you know things. You know how many people I've said, I can prove to you there's no such thing as a chickenpox virus, and I go through the thing, and they listen and they say, so what causes chickenpox? So who are your real parents? Because until you tell me what caused chickenpox, I'm going to believe there's a virus. That's weird. Here's the answer to your question. If you think like that, you're never going to know anything. Period. So when you hear a paper or hear a claim, find out what the claim is. Whatever it is. There's a nuclear weapon exploded in Hiroshima. Fine. That's the claim. And you go investigate it. Turns out there's no evidence for that. And then
I actually was going to bring that up because you mentioned at the start about the nuclear thing, and we had a live call last week, and I actually mentioned that. I said I saw that they had firebombs. I saw before they so-called on the nuclear test, and then all the camera evidence and everything. Everything was hidden. And how come the city's thriving? And they couldn't I said, I thought you're not supposed to be able to go near a place for 1,000 years if it's got a nuclear.
Yeah, right.
Both of them are thriving.
Right. They have this place, the Bikini Islands. It's a funny name. They somewhere between 23 and 36 nuclear explosions. It's where they tested these nuclear weapons back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even I think in the 90s. Now, 20 years later, it's like a tourist resort. There's lagoons and turtles and palm trees, and they have organic vegetables. And I say, wait a minute. I thought if you had one of these, let alone 23, that like 1,000 years, it's like what wipes out life. In other words, you falsified that claim. Now, then the person will say, so what are they blowing off there? I mean, I don't know, dynamite probably. But the claim is very specific. There's a process called fission, and you stick it in a container, and the neutrons, which, by the way, they've never shown there's even such a thing as a neutron in the first place. That's a whole nother story. So you find the claim is not true. You don't have to know what is true. Once you do that, it frees you up to learn things, investigate things, and it's like the veil comes off, and it just feels like a relief. Now I don't have to go through life believing in these superstitions, most of which are there to scare you.
Exactly. People living in fear, which in turn causes them to be ill internally.
Yeah, and not think. Yeah. Because as soon as you're afraid, then, and I tell you, that one is such a huge thing because there's so many things like, oh, well, if they don't get on top of this Ukraine, they're going to have a nuclear war, right? They always say, if we don't do this, there's going to be they've been saying that for 70 years. How come nobody made a mistake and said, fuck this, I'm going to blow off a nuclear weapon? I'm sick of this. This is the only way we're going to win. It doesn't happen. Might it happen?
I've even asked on my crypto one, I said, with these so-called cyber attacks and everything, that they can even break into massive companies, why can't they go in and launch so-called nuclear bombs, like.
Yeah, right. Or steal the money from, Bank of America. Like, why don't they do that? Anyways.
So, listen, thoroughly enjoyed, but I want to just, before we finish, you've got online class. We just find out a bit more what you're doing, how people can, get in touch with you and with the online classes, what it's all about.
Yeah, so the main site is Dr. Tom Cowan, and the two main initiatives we're working on now are we have a curriculum where we have a program for helping practitioners learn about real medicine, or what we call the new biology. And then we launched a online clinic called the New Biology Clinic, where we have doctors and other practitioners who work with people in the way that I described, not a whole different way of seeing medicine. We see symptoms as your body's communication. And it's really for people who are, the regular medicine is not working for me. It's just not working. I got to find somebody who looks at this different. And it's not your typical alternative holistic practice. It's that they have the same way of thinking. They just use different drugs, essentially. So this is a whole different way of seeing health and wellness, and how to recover, how to work with your body to recover in the right way.
Yeah, excellent. I'll make sure I put the link both in the audio and the video. Tom, thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to getting you back, because you're a wealth of knowledge, and I know that people have learned a lot today. So thank you very much.
Right. Thank you.
No problem. So that's all for the Speaking and Awakening podcast. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share with your friends, and comment on what we discussed. We love to read your comments. Until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you'll find my 6 podcasts on bio.link/podcaster. And also, if you'd like to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, you'll find the information on that, or on the QR code that's there. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends, because it really helps. Until next week, take care.